Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast. Join me, Robyn.
And me, Michelle, as we chat openly about personal growth, creativity, and building a career in the arts. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the 8th episode of Stream of Art. We are going to be talking today about self-compassion. As always, we're going to start off with a little check-in. So, Robyn, how did everything go with you this week?
It was good. I'm just reviewing. I'm like, what were my goals for the week? I did revisit that play that I had. Awesome. I had started this years ago, and there's something there. So this is just really just a for fun thing. But I was reading through. I'm like, there is something there with this. Like, the story is interesting, but the writing, I'm like, all of this needs to go. Because this sounds like something that I wrote when I was 26, which it was kind of something that I wrote when I was 26. So it's definitely, all of it's a rewrite, but like the story pieces are interesting and are intriguing. So that was kind of cool, just to kind of get back into like the writing headspace. And then other than that, like I've continued, I've still been doing the daily paintings, which I'll be doing the last one on the 31st. And I'm actually thinking that I will continue to do them.
Awesome.
I'm thinking. I haven't quite decided, but I thought that might be kind of interesting, because what I've been doing is kind of like every day I sort of paint my interpretation of like an emotion, like the emotional state that I'm currently in. So I thought that's kind of like as a visual diary, I thought that might be cool to keep doing.
Yeah.
And then I did work more on that large painting. And that was an interesting process, because I got it to a point and it still wasn't quite like, there's elements of it that I liked, and then there's elements of it that I just really bothered me. And I kind of I had to make a sort of decision, like, do I keep poking away at this to try to salvage it, or do I just let it go? Because it didn't feel, well, it's kind of like, it's an interesting sort of decision to try to make, but like because I felt like there was potential, but it didn't feel right to me. Like something was just like, I just didn't, I had like negative energy around it or something, because it was aggravating me as well. So anyways, I ended up painting all over it and sort of starting from scratch. And what I've come up with now is sort of a similar kind of theme. Like, it's still like kind of oceanscape, whatever, sunset-y kind of thing, but a completely different feeling. And like the brush strokes are much looser, and it just, I'm looking at it right now, trying to figure out how to describe it. But it just, I'm like, oh, see, this is what I want. This is what I wanted. Like, this is what I was trying to get at, but I kind of like, before I kind of went down a different path where it was a bit more tight. And then once you're kind of there, you're kind of committed to that kind of more tight brush strokes that are like, and so it was kind of, I had to redo. Like, I couldn't get into the kind of looser thing, because I was already kind of on that path of like tight, small brush strokes. So that was cool. That was cool to just like it felt really cathartic to have created this thing. And I knew that I could make it better and I could make it nice. But to just decide, like, I could, but this isn't where I want to go. And I'm just going to restart and let this go. And, like, not force it to be anything. Just start over, start fresh. So that was pretty cool. It was a neat experience.
Yeah, I love that. And I can just feel the sort of relaxation from you about it. Like, you are just, like, like, it's just making that decision to follow your instinct and not feeling like, well, I have to finish it because it's the sunk cost fallacy of like, I spent all this time, like, I have to see it through to the end to be able to go, this is just not, I'm just not feeling this.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that you said, like, how you just had this, like, this negative energy around it, this just like, frustration or whatever you're feeling. And to acknowledge that is so helpful, because there's something important there. Whenever you're feeling that around something you're creating, to be able to acknowledge it and go, well, that is a pretty big sign that this is something I have to step away from. I think that's great.
Yeah, we have a tendency to kind of hold on to things, or I do anyways. I shouldn't say we. yeah, like to hold on. And I've, thinking back, it's like I've gotten into this situation before. And then what ends up happening is it kind of discourages me from even painting. Because,
Yeah.
I'm having these sort of like negative feelings, but I'm holding on to it for whatever reason because I'm just determined to keep it moving forward or whatever. And then I end up just not painting because, of course, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, well, and
So,
that's something I love too, is that then you went in this other direction, so you kept going. It was just, acknowledging that once you went down this one path, that it wasn't right, but you didn't just stop. You always keep going, and I think that's a really important lesson for all of us creatives to learn, is that if you go down the wrong path, whether it's something broader in terms of the direction of, your art career, or, in terms of your overall artistry, or if it's just for like a singular project, if you go down the wrong path, you can always just take another path. Like, you don't
yeah.
have to give up. You don't have to, because that's an important part of the process, is figuring out what it is you don't want or what doesn't feel right. And then that allows you to move forward with so much more certainty about what is right, or at least to have a clearer idea of what that is. Again, whether it's for a specific project or just overall. And I think that kind of confidence is something that can only be earned through having a lot of those experiences of what doesn't feel right.
And it's interesting too, because for me, this kind of holding on, I'm sort of holding on to this idea of what could be. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like I don't want to let go of it, because how about if I just keep working at it a little bit more, if I stick with it a bit more, if I don't abandon it so quickly. And I think this comes down to some sort of like some limiting beliefs I have about myself, where it's like I'm
Mm-hmm.
lazy, I don't put the work in, I abandon things too quickly without like really giving it my full effort, like all those things come into play. So I feel like this need to keep going, because if I don't, maybe I'm jumping ship too early and this thing could have been awesome.
Yeah.
But I guess like you can kind of flip that around. It's like, but if I do that, I'm depriving myself of going another path that could also lead to something awesome.
Yeah.
So it, like, I think sometimes you do have to kind of get out of your head and get into your body and think like, how is this feeling? And follow that instead. Because I think more often than not, feeling positive about something versus frustrated about something that you're creating is going to lead to a better end result than something that you create out of like frustration.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think too, if you're ever uncertain about something you're working on, you can always come back to it later. If there is that sort of sense of like, this could be something like, and I think seeing the potential in something is also a signal that maybe there's something to this, but it's just not the right time. We've talked about this a lot, because this is part of my process, where if I'm writing a song and I get to a point where I just hit a wall, I'm pretty good now at being able to tell whether or not I can do something with it at some point. Sometimes it's just a sense of like, I don't think I can do anything, or it's a sense of I feel like there's something here, but it's just not the right time. And sometimes I can revisit something 2 or 3 times, and it takes me that many attempts to realize it's just a dead end. And then in that case, I can like let it go and be okay just moving on. But sometimes that is what it takes. I will sometimes come back to something over the course of a few years, and it takes that long for me to figure out what I need to do with it, especially if something keeps kind of poking at the back of my mind. So if you put something aside and then never think about it again, I think that's a pretty good sign that, it was what it was, and it's not something probably worth revisiting. But
Yeah.
if something keeps sort of popping up and keep, like, for me, it might be like a melody or a lyric idea or something. If it keeps popping into my head, even if I've struggled to develop it in the past, I know that it's something probably worth coming back to at some point until it clicks.
Yeah. Yeah. So how about you? How was your week?
My week was good. I got almost everything done I had wanted to accomplish. So
Awesome.
I finished both of the things I was practicing on guitar that I wanted to sort of hit a stopping point. I got there. I finished one of my mixing courses, and I have a little bit left on another one that I'll be able to finish before RPM starts. Or if I don't, the last little bit that'll be left, I can finish it in February at some point. So that's almost done.
Right.
I did give myself some more rest this week, so
Woo.
I can come into next week. And I feel like, again, even better than last week. So I feel really good about, getting started on Thursday, jumping into the deep end and going hardcore RPM. Speaking of which, I did make my routine for RPM. I've got it all planned out. I'm actually going to share that at the end of the episode as sort of part of my what I'm going to be doing next week goal setting. And the one thing I didn't do was set up. So I had made a note about setting up systems. That's something I'm going to visit in March. I'm not going to worry about that at this point. I think the things I have set up now are good enough. I'm going to be able to stay on top of things. I think one thing I may or may not be doing through February is my blog, which I'm like a few weeks I haven't been posting. I just, as I sort of hit that burnout wall, I just put it aside. And I have a post that's almost done, but I'm not sure if I'm going to bother trying to keep up. That might be like, because I did last year and it was a lot of extra work on top of, the mountain of music I was writing. This year, because I'm not doing as much in the way of, having a really big album, I might be able to make it work, but I'm not going to make a decision. I'm not going to commit to it. Like if it doesn't feel right, I'm just not going to do it. I don't mind putting it off until March because I don't want to put out a blog post I'm not proud of. So I'd rather step aside and put my full creative energy into RPM than sort of split my attention and do a less, polished RPM and then, a sort of half-hearted set of blog posts. So I'm sort of undecided, but as far as the stuff I have to do, like as far as the teaching and lesson prep goes and all of that, the systems I have are good enough. I know I can stay on top of everything I have to do. So I think I'm in good shape. And yeah, I did a little bit of digging into some stuff I want to try to push myself musically. I pulled out, I have a couple of books on, like polyrhythms and metric modulation and like interesting rhythmic things. I'm trying to think about where I might be weaker in my songwriting and composing and all of that. And I feel like rhythmically, metrically, I can probably do some more interesting things. So I might sort of try to explore that and maybe dig into some more harmonic stuff. Like I feel like I tend to use a lot of the same chords and I kind of just want to, see if I can. I have so many incredible books and courses and resources with all these interesting like chord voicings and progressions and things like that. I might sort of dip into some of those as I'm trying to generate ideas just to see what it pulls out of me. So those are kind of the two areas I really want to challenge myself musically. So harmonically and then rhythmically and metrically and all of that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like I love that, and it's kind of it is sort of stepping outside of your like challenging your typical go-tos, because I do think that we develop sort of like defaults in terms of how we create. Definitely. And what I really like is how you sort of take a very curious, non-critical approach to analyzing your own work and sort of looking at like how you can push yourself further or how you can maybe break away from these almost like, I don't want to say creative ruts, but they kind of are, right? Like you just kind of get into this way of creating, and then which isn't always it's kind of interesting because like there's some people who like they make their career where they just have that one sound or that one kind of style of painting, and they really like that's what they build their whole image around or whatever, which is also fine too. But I have a preference for those who like to experiment and create new sounds and challenge themselves creatively, like that's kind of that's what I like to see. I think that's interesting. Yeah,
100%. I'm exactly the same way. I mean, I definitely can appreciate somebody who kind of finds their thing and then they're happy creating within that, for sure. And I'm sure looking through my CD catalog, I'm sure there are a lot of musicians who fit that bill where, I mean, they just kind of release the same thing. Like somebody I think about a lot is like Colin James, who does, his sort of blues / a bit singer-songwriter kind of thing. He's been doing the same thing for years, and I'm always really happy to listen to him because it's sort of like you know what to expect, but I get super excited about the artists where I'm not sure what their next release is going to sound like. And that's always so exciting for me. And I think maybe, and you're probably the same way too. I think it's because I like to create with new things.
Yeah.
Like I feel myself not necessarily getting bored, but I feel myself getting a little bit creatively restless.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I start to notice I'm falling into these patterns, I like to just challenge myself and just do something, because I know that with whether it's maybe a new set of chords, or it's, you know, when I got Ableton, that changed the game for me. It's new rhythmic ideas or whatever. Like anytime I have something new to create with, some kind of new tool, it pulls something different out of me. And it's still me. So it's really interesting. It's like getting to know these different layers of my musical self that can only be opened via, you know, these sort of like particular tools that I'm using to create.
I love how you said that, and it also made me think of Shrek, where it's like ogres are like onions. But I like I love that, getting to know the different layers of yourself. Yeah, and I am the same way, but it does like create a bit of a challenge when it comes to, like, I have to, and I'm kind of thinking a bit about this, like trying to make some choices here, because while it feels great to kind of go down these different creative avenues and like play around with really different ways of creating and different styles and all that stuff, it is hard to market yourself and to sell your work when you are shifting so much, because it becomes challenging to build that audience, which is where people who have that kind of solid sound, or like, you know, consistent visual look to their work, it's a little bit easier to build that audience, because the audience grows because you're kind of putting out similar things, right? So and people want what they like, and so it is like, if you're changing up, because, and for me, I go like, I do landscapes and I do pure abstraction. It's like, well, like people who love landscapes aren't necessarily going to feel the same way about abstract, and so it is like, you're growing your audience in one department, and then you're switching gears completely, and then that audience is largely alienated and they go off and find someone else, and now you're having to like rebuild your audience. So it's kind of like, from a business perspective, it becomes, you have to be a little bit smart about how you kind of explore these different angles or different themes or whatever.
Yeah, you know, I think an audience for the most part likes some level of predictability. I think because, you know, when life itself feels so unstable, having something you can keep coming back to that feels safe it's comforting. And I think a lot of people look for that in their art. But for a lot of artists, that becomes incredibly stifling. And I think it ends up being a trade-off. And this is something I've definitely thought about, because, you know, when it comes to the music I write, I always just want to go with what feels most exciting to me in the moment. I don't think I could write something and be proud of it if I wasn't excited about it. I think it sort of ties to what you were saying earlier about, you know, you're not going to have a good end result if you're miserable the whole time you're making something. Like there has to be something there energetically, you know, and for me, it's like, it's curiosity and excitement and joy and all of that. I need that lighting me up to write something I think that is compelling, even if it's just to me. And so I recognize that in terms of marketing myself as someone to listen to, that is going to make it difficult, because I know there are people who are going to really resonate with the stuff that I used to write, the stuff that is a little bit more like, you know, John Mayer-esque, because he was my biggest influence at the time I started doing songwriting, compared to now where my influences are leaning, you know, into the realm of embracing a lot more in the way of electronic sounds and all of that, and being really into James Blake and Jordan Rakai, and, you know, so it's just it's a different sound. It's still, again, to me, sounds like me, and I think you'll always have people who enjoy what you do regardless of what it is, but for the most part, you're going to have people who like, so for you, you'll have people who like your landscapes and people who like the abstract stuff. And then you'll have people who like it all. Like, I like everything you make.
That's why I like you so much.
Yeah. Weren't you just saying an episode or two ago that you don't really like me?
I like to keep you on your toes.
That's fair. It's probably a good thing to do. Keep me humble. But how much of that, and I think for you and I too, I think we resonate on so many levels. And so maybe to me, seeing your art and seeing that you go in different directions, I'm like, I totally get that. I love that. Because I know for me how exciting it is to explore new directions, to take something like the act of, for me, writing a song, and you get to dress it up in all these different ways. But it's still like the same, in a lot of ways, it's the same process, but like you always get to do different things. Maybe it's kind of like eating, like the process of eating is always the same, but you want different foods, which is funny because my mom and I always talk about how she and I are like very happy eating the same thing all the time. Like we're very weird that way. Like, we tend to live on like the same foods.
Right.
But in terms of like creating, I like the adventure of being able to explore different worlds.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you were saying, like it still sounds like you, because it's like I've listened to your music through different like iterations, and it does, you're right though, it does sound like you, like you're doing very different things, but I hear you in it, which is, yeah. And I wonder, I'm looking around my studio right now and I have like all the different kind of like eras of Robyn's art, and I'm like, and I think I am in it all, like it, and some of it looks very different than other things, but like it does still sort of feel like me.
Yeah. And I think that's probably true for every creative person. I think we all have a unique fingerprint, like literally and then artistically, and regardless of the direction we go in, it's always there.
You know what? You're totally right. Yeah. No, you're totally right. Because I'm just remembering. So I remember going to an art show and seeing a woman there she had paintings, a lot of paintings up, and they were all like, she did like abstract and then landscape and then like portraits or whatever, and like, so all very different things, but they all, you could tell that they are all by her, and I think it's because of the way she used color too. Like so there was like this color stamp, and I'm looking around at my stuff and I'm like, yeah, like the way I use colors stays pretty consistent. Like I'm using bolder colors, and yes, you're totally right. There is like a fingerprint. Like you can, even when the style changes, you can still see that person.
Yeah, and I think it's true also of like certainly in music, switching instruments. And the best example I have is David Gilmour. He has this incredible album called On an Island. And there's one song that he plays on saxophone. I think one of his sons had been learning saxophone at one point, and so he learned right along with him.
Oh, cool.
And it sounds, if you listen to it, the song is called Red Sky at Night. And if you listen to it, it sounds like David Gilmour playing the saxophone. Like it's all of his like melodic sensibility that he normally uses on the guitar, but on the saxophone. And it's so interesting because even across these very different instruments, it's still, he still sounds like David Gilmour. There's just this signature you just can't escape. And I think for anybody maybe who is feeling a little bit of trepidation about venturing into these different territories, maybe they're concerned they're going to lose themselves or not be able to, find their way back. Like you can't lose yourself when you're creating. You do, but you lose all the sort of the parts of yourself you don't want. But your creative essence is still always going to be there. It's always going to be carried around with you. And I'm curious too about whether that would translate, into completely different mediums. If I got into painting, would my voice as a songwriter come through in what I painted? I think that's interesting, and I have to look. I have to look and see about maybe artists who do other art too. And I'm thinking about like Ben Levin. He's he used to be in Bent Knee, and he does solo stuff too. He writes incredible music, and he does videos too now. He got into making videos, and I feel like his videos are very like him. Like if you go onto his YouTube channel and watch any of the videos he does for his music, like I'm thinking about like that feels very like his music feels very Ben Levin, and then his videos feel very Ben Levin. So I feel like just whatever we do creatively, it's like always going to have our fingerprint on it.
Yeah, that's a really great. I mean, and I'm thinking like I'm trying to think of like there's a couple actors that come to mind who also, so like Brendan Fraser does photography.
Okay.
Jim Carrey, I think, paints as well.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at either of their works, but it would be interesting to see like if their work kind of is similar to, I mean, Jim Carrey has a very distinct acting style.
Yeah.
So like, does it kind
true.
of, you know, I'm trying to think of musicians that also, and I know there's tons of musicians that paint as well, and I can't,
I think
none
Tony
of them are coming
Bennett,
to mind. Oh, really?
I think he painted as well. I haven't seen any of his paintings, but
Oh, interesting. Because I do think you're right. I think that there's something, but what's interesting too is you can't really define it. It's just a feeling. You're like, yeah, this feels
it is
like that
exactly.
person.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
makes sense.
And I mean, yeah, and you probably could get really granular and, like, for example, and I've seen this done before on channels on YouTube where they'll like dissect a particular songwriter's like songwriting style. It'd be like, oh, they really like this particular melody, or they really like this note, so they hit this note a lot. So they have little things like that, little quirks, but beyond that, like, anybody else did the same thing and it just wouldn't sound the same.
That is such a fascinating thing, because like we do the same thing with art, right? Like and studying art history, and we're looking at like the colors, their palette, and like the way they applied the paint, all of that stuff, which is like, but that only tells like a fraction of the story as to why their art is their art. Because I could do the same thing, I could use the same brushstrokes and the same palette, but I still there is an energy there that goes beyond any kind of definition. Like there is something there that only that artist can capture. Like no other artist can put that into their work. And same with writing, and same with acting and music and like all the arts. And that, I think, maybe is the thing that's the most fascinating about artwork. And maybe that's what like humans find so compelling about creative acts, is that it is like the one thing where you really get the sense of the person in a way that you wouldn't be able to with any other form of communication.
I think you're 100% right. Yeah, because in your art, you reveal a part of yourself that you can't reveal any other way.
I'm not even aware of it
intentionally. Exactly. It's just showing the world who you are through this thing that you've chosen to do. And, you know, maybe some people do that in the way they serve their communities, and, you know, in any sort of anything they do that puts something out into the world. And for us, you know, that's just with art, but it demonstrates just this deep-seated part of ourselves that we aren't even aware of. It's just, it's something we just take for granted. Yeah. But it's with us as we do everything.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. Very cool.
I feel like we're going to have a conversation at some point about like artistic voices and all of that. I think it's so interesting.
And creative expression and all of that stuff. Like, like that's something that's kind of, and I think what I find so interesting about my work, and I've always, like from the beginning, like when I started painting, I did abstract. And what I found so interesting was like looking at the paintings afterwards. Like it was just intuitive painting. And looking at it afterwards, and then kind of seeing like drawing meaning from it for myself, right? Like, and seeing kind of almost like after the fact, learning about the emotional state I was in, or the kind of the energy that I had, right? And so it's, for me, it's always been kind of a way of getting to know myself better, and I think I
love that
part of the reason why I find it hard to stick with one kind of style. Like I think that's why I kind of like to explore the different, like go into different directions frequently, because I think it is, I mean, it's like I'm getting to know myself through a different means. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting on something important. You know, we are creating as a way of getting to know ourselves. And I think you're right on. The idea of wanting to explore different avenues to maybe it comes from a place of not being able to find yourself in one place. And maybe that's why some people are able to connect there. They find sort of one thing, it feels like home to them. But maybe for some of us, we find it in many different places. And so you just feel compelled, or because it reveals something new about you each time.
Yeah.
Each time you go in a different direction, it's like learning about a new piece of yourself you didn't know was there.
When you said some people find that place that feels like home to them and they just kind of settle there, that kind of resonates, like, well, it doesn't resonate with me, but I'm thinking, but it's intriguing to me because I'm like, I wonder actually for me if I'm actually uncomfortable with the idea of like finding that place that feels like home. Like I'm wanting to push myself out of that comfort zone creatively for whatever reason. Like there's something very satisfying in like pushing myself out of that zone. And like that might be kind of a driving force as well. And yeah, maybe because like, and well, because we do learn about ourselves when we're uncomfortable, right? So
yes.
So yeah, and that could be part of the reason. Yeah, so then it kind of becomes interesting because it's like there's, you know, you can paint for self-discovery or you can paint to, because I always, in the back of my mind, I always have the kind of like the business angle to this, right? And so like painting for that kind of self-discovery angle is not as consistent. So, but that could be like almost a separate activity. And then you have your painting to fill someone else's, you know, a gap or a need or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're two, like separating the two things. They're not the same thing. They're like two different practices.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have a note for an episode at some point to talk about that specifically. So I'd be interested to dig into that a bit more. The idea of like creating for yourself versus like creating for commercial
You're right.
release.
We do have a note on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about that next week.
Yeah. Stay tuned, everyone.
Spoiler alert.
Surprise.
So actually on that note,
should we get to the topic at hand?
Yeah.
Self-compassion.
So do you want to kick it off this week? Do you have some thoughts you'd like to share?
I mean, the only thing I could really think of with the first thing that came to mind anyways was just like the role that acknowledging your own boundaries and sticking to them to an extent has to play in self-compassion.
Yeah, definitely.
And then also just like with boundaries too, it's like figuring out what your boundaries are can be tricky, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases you can't really stick to them. Like there are situations where you kind of you shouldn't have to. In a perfect world, you shouldn't have to, but I think there are times where it's like you kind of have to sacrifice your boundaries for a greater goal or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like for me, self-compassion is acknowledging those boundaries and making a conscious choice as to whether I allow them to get pushed or not. Because I think we do have we do have control there, right? We can.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there with the boundaries. That's an interesting thing because that's not the first thing I think about when I think about self-compassion. But I think that's really important. And that's an area I think a lot of people struggle with is recognizing what their boundaries are. And their boundaries are probably, all of our boundaries are probably tied to our values too.
Yeah.
I think it's all linked, right? I think when we know what we value, it makes it easier for us to establish boundaries. But then you have to have enough compassion for yourself and to care enough about yourself to actually follow through on those, whether it's ensuring that other people respect your boundaries or making sure that you respect your own boundaries, because that's probably where I struggle the most, is in setting up boundaries for myself and then not just crossing them. You know, I think that can go a long way to letting you really feel more comfortable in your life, and you know, even in terms of like detaching from work and in all of that, and being able to say no, which is really difficult.
It's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah,
it's a really, really hard thing to do. And like the reason boundaries is top of mind right now for me, because that's what I've been practicing, you know, setting and communicating my boundaries, which is a really, really challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
It's very hard to recognize what your boundary is. And something that, again, has come up in therapy with me, because I'd said this, I said, like, how do you know what your boundary is? Like, how do you, and she said, well, like, just ask yourself in the moment, are you okay with this? Yes or no? Mm-hmm. And that's been really helpful because it's like, so it means I don't really necessarily have to define what my boundary is but when I'm in a situation and I'm feeling a little bit like, is this okay with me? Yes or no? And it's like, sometimes it's a no, in which case, okay, this is a time where you have to set your boundary here and like enforce it. Sometimes it's a no, but in this case, I'm going to let it slide. So that's a conscious, like, your boundaries being a little bit violated here, but in this case, you're gonna be okay with it because it's serving a greater purpose or whatever, right? Like, you're making a conscious choice and you're aware, like, you've acknowledged that your boundary is being pushed and you're going to proceed anyways. And there's something, it feels less unhealthy when you're doing it consciously than when you're just unconsciously just letting your own boundaries be violated all the time.
Yeah, and you're left feeling gross, and you're like, like, why do I feel so bad or so taken advantage of? And to be able to acknowledge, okay, well, this is the boundary that matters, and okay, yes, I will make the choice to let it slide this time. It actually, something I read in that book I mentioned, Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish, he was talking about establishing rules. And I like the idea because he said that's one thing that people, so let's say you're trying not to drink as much alcohol or something. He said you can establish a rule where I only have like one glass of wine on Friday nights with dinner. Yeah. Like, you can establish a rule because it makes it easier for you to be able to not cave to peer pressure and social pressure to be drinking, whenever you're out doing stuff, to be able to say, oh, actually, I have a rule where I only drink at, this time, whatever. It makes it easier, I think, for you to, like, respect whatever, to be able to say, I've established a rule, so this is something I'm going to follow. And then for other people, to tell them you have a rule, they're not going to, hopefully, keep pushing you to do the thing they want you to do. And it has me thinking about, like, where I can establish some rules, because I often feel like I'm, accommodating other people at my own expense. And I always feel horrible after. And so I love the idea of just creating some rules and being able to, come forward to people with that, to be able to say, I actually have a rule where I don't X, Y, and Z. And then just to be able to live that way. And I think because something like a boundary even can be invisible, right? It feels a little foggier, maybe. Or it feels like it can be pushed and pulled, versus like a rule is something that's like very clear cut and should not be broken.
Makes it easier for the people around you to kind of because I find with me sometimes, like, my boundaries almost shift a bit sometimes depending on what my energy, like, where I'm at energetically, how much energy I have, and like, and again, this is all a process, and I haven't fully defined what my boundaries are yet either, but I'm, it's all work in progress. But I think, like, I like that kind of language of a rule, because people it feels a little less like, I feel like if you were to start talking to people about, like, oh, like, this you're pushing against my boundary right now, it's a little bit too, like, like,
it's too therapy speak, I think, for a lot of people to,
and I think some people would be like, roll your eyes kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
But when you say, like, oh, I have I only drink on Fridays, like, that's my rule for myself, I can see how people will respond completely differently to that.
This is something Cal Newport talks about to help people who are struggling at work, where they have, maybe a boss or a manager who keeps pushing too much onto their plate. You can establish a quota, and if somebody then comes to you with, like, I need you to work on this project, and be like, well, I have a quota of, like, whatever, however many projects per quarter, per, month or whatever, put it at the end of the line. And then, you have, like, a queue where you have, like, any other projects, and you kind of pull them onto your plate after. And then that just helps people, because people aren't going to argue with that. People aren't, then they're going to have to say, well, no, you should just do my thing. Like, but it's like, no, my plate's full. I only work on this much at any one time. Once I'm finished something, then the next thing gets moved, and yours would be, this far down the line, just to make it really clear. Because what people do alternatively is they wait until they get so stressed that they just like, that's their justification for like, no, I'm too busy, I'm so stressed. But to be really clear too also demonstrates to people that you're like on top of things. You're like, to say, I have a rule, like for me, I just don't drink. So like, I have a rule, I just don't drink. And I'd never get bothered about it.
Yeah.
And so I think too that lets people know that you've made this decision and that you just cannot be, it's manipulated is too strong of a word, but like you can't have your mind swayed in any one way or the other.
Well, I think also when someone says to me like, I don't drink, I feel like a real big jerk if I'm like, oh, come on, just
but
one.
That's also because you're also a good person.
Oh, yeah. But like
not all people are going to be that way.
Sure. But when you state so clearly, I think it makes it harder for that other person to kind of nag at you or try to convince you because you've stated very firmly. But when you're kind of wishy-washy about things, that's where there's like that opening for people to kind of push and convince and try to get their way. That sounds really negative. People are just people, right? Like we're just like humans try to manipulate each other to try to get what they want out of a situation.
Of course.
And that's just what we all do. And I don't think any of us like to admit it, but I think it's true.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah, so I think like that's why it's our job to be firm with things so that it makes it more challenging for people to do what we just naturally do, which is try to get our way,
Yeah, exactly. I think it's so helpful to understand just how people work and, to set yourself up for success by just being clear about what you do or don't do. And I'm trying to be better about that for myself too, because it's so easy for me to just want to do something to like please another person. And it just doesn't work. So for me to establish certain rules for myself, even if I'm not using that language with somebody else, it at least lets me, not manipulate myself to do something I really don't want to do.
And that is self-compassion.
Yeah. I love that because that's definitely something I need to work on. But, I just didn't even think about that in terms of self-compassion. For me, where it's been really helpful is in dealing with perfectionism and specifically with dealing with failure. And it can be any kind of failure. It can be failure in terms of, an outcome. So maybe, in the past, if I had like a bad performance or something, I would just beat myself up if everything wasn't exactly perfect, for all the reasons I talked about in last week's episode. It was so important to me to be perfect. And when I wasn't, I was just horrible to myself. I can be quite cruel and I get the brunt of that. So introducing some self-compassion so that when I do fall short, as I inevitably do because I'm a human being, and this especially has been a big part of my personal development journey over the last couple of years, is I've been really actively working just to become more like the person I'd like to be. I do fall short, and it's been really helpful to just be able to say like, it's okay. Like you're human, just get back up and try tomorrow. You're gonna keep getting better. And every time I fall back, instead of going, well, I'm obviously horrible, it's like, no, I'm a human being. Yeah. And I'm living in this crazy, chaotic world, and I'm just trying to do the best I can. And as long as I just keep moving forward, I'm gonna be able to live with myself. If it ever got to the point where I just gave up again, because I can't achieve perfection, that would be like such a waste. But to sort of, as Brad Stulberg talks about in his book, The Practice of Groundedness, talks about marrying self-discipline with self-compassion. Like you want both of those things. So for me, the self-discipline comes down to, of course, my working on my music, and then also working on myself, being diligent about my journaling and my reading and practicing the things I'm learning, and then having the compassion to say it's okay. It's okay when you get it wrong. It's okay when you have a bad day. It's okay when, for me, like working on my temper has been a big thing because I am prone to outbursts of anger, and that's something I've really worked on.
That's fat. Like I would never have pegged you as someone who has angry outbursts. It's so funny that, because I feel like, I think that I think a lot of us do. And a lot of us don't seem like people that would.
No, because it always got unleashed on just the people around me, like the people closest to me.
Gotcha. It gets unleashed on my computer.
Yes, and inanimate objects that do not cooperate. Absolutely. Not that I'm saying that you and I aren't close. We don't spend enough time together. And now that we're spending more time together, I've got a lot of that under control. But like that was a good yes, you don't have to live in constant fear of an emotional outburst. No, and it's been interesting on this journey to curb my anger. I've had moments where it's slipped, and I've I would yell at my dog, and I hated that. I hated that I was falling back into this person that I so desperately did not want to be. And so it's really been an important thing to be able to, as Seneca says, like, be a friend to myself.
Yeah.
And that's a really important part of this journey. And he actually, in his letters to his friend Lucilius, he quotes Hecato, who says, how do I know I've made progress? It's because I'm now a friend to myself. And I think that's important too. Not this idea of just getting better. Like, that's an important part of it. But as I continue on this self-development journey, I am also just becoming more of my own friend. I feel more like I'm in my own corner. Like, I'm not just standing back, judging myself for all my failures and all my flaws. I'm actually like along for the ride and saying, like, okay, like, you stumbled, you can get back up. Like, it's not a big deal. You repair if you can, apologize to the people you need to, and then just keep moving forward, because slip-ups they're going to happen. They're just a part of life.
Anger is such an interesting one too, because I feel like, I know for me, when I get angry or whatever, like, there's so much shame wrapped up in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting about that though, is that because of the shame, we don't even bother taking the time to be curious about the anger that we felt and why we felt it. Because I've noticed, and again, like, as I've been working kind of on like boundaries and thinking more consciously about my own boundaries, I've realized some of the anger that I have, or the angry outburst or whatever, it's linked to, there were boundaries that were being pushed that I didn't recognize. And so then realizing, like, okay, because like you said this, I think last episode, that emotions, it's information. It's telling us something about ourselves. So I think anger is something that we need to get curious about, because it will tell us something. And there's a reason why we fly off the handle. And often it's because we haven't actually been demonstrating self-compassion in some way, whether that's been letting our boundaries get pushed, or it's maybe not being disciplined. And then as a result of not being disciplined, we haven't been getting things done. And as a result of that, there's been all this stress that's built up. And as a result of that, there's the angry outburst, right? So, and also when you're saying discipline, I think, like, self-discipline is even self-compassion in my mind.
Yes.
In a way,
I
right? Because, like, if you don't have self-discipline, you're not showing up for yourself. And showing up for yourself is a form of self-compassion. It's all linked.
It is. It's all one big, beautiful, tangled web. It's so interesting because I listened to Glennon Doyle's podcast called We Can Do Hard Things. And this past week, they had on Dr. Becky Kennedy. She's, if I'm not mistaken, she's like a psychologist. She has a book out called Good Inside. She does a lot with, like, kids and stuff like that. And she was on, and they talked about mom rage. And it was so interesting, and Glennon just talked about this experience she had getting really mad and, like, slamming the bathroom door in the face of, like, her 3-year-old daughter or something. And
I did that to the dog the other day.
See, and so I was talking to my mom about this. I'm like, I wonder if there's, like, dog mom rage, because, like, I would get that with my dog, where she just wouldn't stop barking, and I loved my dog more than life itself. And yet sometimes I would just like stop barking and just yell at her. And what Dr. Becky Kennedy was talking about in this episode was that our anger comes from not having our needs met.
Yeah.
And that, I think, ties into exactly what you were saying, that when we get to the point where we're angry, it's because we haven't been, whether exactly, like, we're not having our boundaries respected, or respecting our own boundaries, or we're not taking care of ourselves. Maybe we're tired. It's, it's like Are you hungry? Are you tired? And often we're all those things. Are we stressed? Are we overwhelmed? And for me, I think that was definitely a big part of my anger, is that I let things build up. And some of that came definitely from not respecting my own boundaries, and from, just feeling, helpless. And some of that came down to just needing more self-discipline to sort of get some stuff taken care of. And so it's so true, like what you're saying about feeling that shame, and that we just don't talk about it. But, maybe not everybody, and this is something I hear Ryan Holiday say a lot, that not everybody necessarily has an anger problem, but anger is a problem for everybody.
Yeah.
Like, it's something we all need to address, and learn how to navigate it. And I love the idea of just looking at your anger, like finding a way. For me, I need to be able to like control my anger, so that even if I'm feeling angry in the moment, I'm not reacting in a way that then I feel bad about later. I'm giving myself the space to react. Exactly.
You
but
learn
I don't
how
want
to
just ignore it.
Yeah.
But I want to address the initial feeling. Like, if I'm feeling angry, like, what is that about? Because it's entirely possible there's something I can do to just preemptively keep myself from having, an issue in the future. Yeah. And for me, I know I'm pretty familiar with like some of my triggers. So like being tired is a big one. Being hungry is a big one. Being overwhelmed is a big one. Like, so if I can do the things to stay on top of all of that, and that's again where it comes down to a lot of self-discipline. I've talked about struggling with my sleep before, struggling to get to bed on time. Like, a lot of that is self-discipline. And, and making sure I'm eating, that's just like, sometimes that depends on the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, and just making sure I'm not overwhelmed or stressed. A lot of that's on me, just to like manage my time properly and be organized. So it's really let me, because I think for a long time I knew that my anger was a problem, but I was too ashamed to address it, and to the thought of like talking about it is like I couldn't acknowledge it, because angry people aren't perfect. That would be a flaw. That is a blemish on my personhood. And I just can't acknowledge it, Yeah. So I think something too, having self-compassion means you're really able to get to know yourself, like the good and the bad, because we're always going to be a composite of all these different characteristics. And some of them are, we have our strengths and then we have our weaknesses. And to really know yourself is to know the whole package. And then you can do something when you know that there's something that needs to be worked on, then you can actually move forward and take the steps to work on it. But if you're constantly trying to avoid those, the dark shadow parts of yourself, they're still there, but, they just come out in these outbursts that end up hurting, people around you or computers around you, if that's, it's giving you trouble in the moment.
I mean, the word that keeps coming to mind here is forgiveness. And I think that's really important. It's just like, and you said earlier too, like, you're just human. And that's been one of the kind of phrases that's been really helpful to me. It's just like, I'm just human. I'm just a human with my faults and my strengths. And I'm doing the best that I can with where I'm at right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm not doing as good as I want to be doing, but I'm doing the best that I can in this moment with who I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, yes, learning to, because there is so much shame around the anger, as I said. And I think one of the ways to overcome that is being curious and by forgiving yourself. I mean, like, I've just like, as like, there's people, like, I've been around other people who've had angry outbursts, and it's like, I forgive them because I recognize that, like, they're either tired or they're super stressed, or they're, like, there's all these different reasons why they've had this like angry thing, right? And I recognize that they're just doing the best that they can do with who they are in that moment. So extending that forgiveness to ourselves, and also just circling back to the parent, what was it? Mom rage? Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Yeah. If there are any parents listening, just like, and I think this is particularly for mothers, this kind of putting the needs of your children in front of your own. And I think that's pretty common. And I think that it's hard for women in particular to prioritize their own needs over those that they're caring for.
Yeah.
And so much guilt around doing that. And just like, here's a friendly voice telling you that it's okay to take care of your own needs first. I just wanted to throw that in there.
I think that's super important. It's the idea of putting your oxygen mask on first.
You got to prioritize yourself. I remember
Yeah.
my mom saying that to me, and I don't know when she said this to me, but it's really stuck with me. It's like, you can't show up for anyone else if you haven't prioritized your own needs.
Yeah.
So like, as a mother, like one of your many jobs is to care for your children. And you can't do that if you're not caring for yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's not the only application of that, right? Like,
yeah,
if we're not caring for ourselves, we can't show up in our work. If we're not caring for ourselves, we can't show up in our relationships. Like, it's really important. And part of caring for yourself is prioritizing your own needs. And part of prioritizing your own needs is being clear on your boundaries.
Yeah.
So super, super important. And I think we all have work to do in that area.
100%. Yeah. And what I'll link to that episode of We Can Do Hard Things in the show notes. So if anybody wants to go check it out, I highly recommend it. It was a great episode. Definitely gave me some perspective. And yeah, I definitely think about this a lot with my music, and I think this is part of why I am so driven to make things better for myself. It's because I know it makes my music better when I'm taken care of.
Right.
That's definitely not the only reason. And I try to be careful that I'm not letting music be the only thing that inspires me to like take good care of myself. Again, I'm trying to have it come from that place of self-compassion where I should take care of myself just because I'm a human and that's what I need.
Yeah.
And I should be on my own team and make sure I'm taken care of. But that is definitely has been a catalyst for me is recognizing that my art is so much better. And like that extends to my teaching, my practicing. It's all better when I'm taking care of myself. And I know that just from the last couple of weeks, taking it a lot easier. I'm like, it's really what I needed. And I can feel myself wanting to show up more.
Yes.
And yeah, and that for me has been like, I'm trying to remind myself that's just all part of that self-compassion, to just remember that side of me matters. The non-musical side is really important. I'm not just this one-dimensional person.
The other thing that came to mind was self-compassion, and I don't know quite how it links, but asking and being open to help.
Yes.
And I'm not, the link to self-compassion isn't super clear, but I think there's a link there.
I think you're 100%. Yeah, finish your thought and then I can add to that.
I guess, I thought like, and I can't remember where I heard this, where I came across this, but I don't know if I was doing an art course or I was watching some sort of like video, I don't know, but they were talking about how, if art is important to you, you need to carve out time. And sometimes, depending on your situation in life, like if you're a parent or if you're working full time or whatever, sometimes it means asking for help. Sometimes it means like, if you're going to carve out time on a Friday afternoon to paint, then, you might need to ask for help. Like you need someone else to get dinner ready that night or whatever, right? Like that is, so like sometimes being open to that help, reaching out for that help plays a part in doing the things that you need and getting your needs met, which is part of self-compassion.
100%.
Yeah. And that's something I'm not super good at either. But I mean, fortunately, like in my situation, it's not like I have a lot of demands on my time anyways, other than work.
Yeah.
So in terms of like carving out time for creating isn't a big issue for me. And I'm very lucky that way. But I think there's ways in which like there are other things I could do to ask for help that like, but instead I just like kind of bang my own head against the wall trying to figure it out on my own, which is like why? Why would you do that when you could just be like, I know you and you're better at this thing. Can you help me out here? But asking for help is it feels very like vulnerable or something. And also the challenge for me is like, I don't want to put anyone out.
Yeah.
And I think because I'm not very good, like if someone were to ask me for help, like I would feel like I have to say yes. Like, because I'm not comfortable saying no yet, I would feel like I have to say yes. So it means whenever I ask someone else for help, I feel like they're going to respond the same way that I would respond, where they feel like they have to say yes. And so that's why it feels like such an imposition, because as a person, I have a really hard time saying no to people. So I assume everyone else is like that as well. So I never want to like ask for help from people unless I know them really well or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of really important things there. Yeah, so immediately for me, because I definitely struggle with that too, asking for help. And I think part of it for me was it just in feeling like a failure, feeling like if I couldn't do it myself, then I have failed. And asking for help is like admitting I failed. And again, you know, see reference to perfectionism.
Right.
I cannot acknowledge my failure because then I'm not perfect. And then what have I done all this for?
Right.
Actually, I have a song, spoiler alert, a song coming out on my full-length album specifically addressing the fact that I don't ask for help, or I didn't ask for help. I'm better about it now, but I really struggled with that for a long time. The song is called No One Needs to Know I'm Lost. And it's really just because it was such a problem in my life where I was like, I'm just going to do everything myself. I'm going to do it all. You know, and I think there's something to be said for having like a DIY mindset. There's a lot we can accomplish on our own, but like to not ask for help is the complete opposite of having self-compassion. It's like, I'm not worthy of getting the assistance that anybody needs throughout their lives. Everybody needs help at some point. And yeah, I definitely resonate with the idea of like not wanting to put people out. And I think there's probably ways to ask for help that maybe makes it easier for somebody to be able to say no if they're just not able to.
Yeah.
But I think it's not helpful to just assume you'll put everybody out. Some people are going to be able to help and actively want to help.
That's true.
There'll be people who will just like rush to your assistance.
Yeah.
Who are like happy to do it because we do like to help people.
That's
like,
right.
We know how it feels like when you are able to help somebody, like how satisfying that is. I mean, that's a huge part of why teaching for me is so satisfying. Like being able to help somebody get better at music is thrilling, and they wouldn't be able to get that help if they hadn't, you know, asked for it. Versus just assuming they can do it all on their own.
That's a good point, because I'm just thinking, like, for me, like, yeah, sometimes when people ask for it's like I really like either I'm tired and I don't want to in that moment or whatever, but then there's times where I'm asked for help on things. It's like it makes me feel really good because in some cases it makes you feel like, particularly when it's something like my mom's asked me for help a lot with in terms of like choosing paint colors or like something for the house, and it's like that always feels really good because it's like, oh, she values my expertise in this area. 100%. And then it gets a little bit stressful sometimes too, because it's like because sometimes she leans too much on me. I'm like, you're the one who has to live with this color, so you like don't just take what I'm saying at face value. But that's a good thing to keep in mind, is sometimes like for other people it feels really good to be asked and to be able to support someone they care about. Why deny someone that opportunity?
Yeah, exactly. And just the idea too of asking for help. I mean, that's something I'm seeing more and more. There's this quote from Marcus Aurelius about, you know, so what if you have to ask for help? So what if you need to reach over and get help from a comrade? Like that's okay. Like that's part of life. Sometimes you need help. Yeah. And you just keep going, you know? And I got this book.
The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's by Charlie Maxey. He was on the Daily Stoic podcast, and I was very interested in checking this out. It's kind of like, it's not really a kid's book per se, but I mean, it's like illustrated, just kind of graphic novel. Yeah. I think you'd actually really like it, but it's like it's also it's not sad, but it's the kind of book that'll make you cry.
That sounds sad. By definition. It's not sad, but it'll make you weep.
It's not sad. It's not that kind of, it's the kind of crying that happens because you've read something really touching or really beautiful.
That really resonates or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And this book is like very much like that, but there's a couple of pages specifically about help. So, okay. So here's one. What is the bravest thing you've ever said? Asked the boy. Help, said the horse.
Aw.
And then there's another one here. Asking for help isn't giving up, said the horse. It's refusing to give up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's
100%.
what it made me think of. It's like that. So yeah, it's not failure. It's you haven't failed if you're acknowledging that there's more to be done, but that you just can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
And I think it's so helpful to, you know, get help from, yeah, if it's just like a friend or a family member, or like get help from an expert if that's what you need. You know, there are experts for a reason. Not everybody can get good at everything. You know, you have to pick a lane, and you know, for as much as you can develop range, you're kind of limited to what you can get good at. And so it's completely fine to, at some point when you need it, say like, I can't get any further with this thing. I need help.
It's funny to me too, the things that are just like the help that we get that's completely normalized and we don't even question it, right? Like I'm thinking, like, I just went to the dentist the other day for a cleaning. I would never clean my own teeth. I probably could. I could get the instruments and do it myself, but I know that I would be terrible and that there's a reason why we go to see a dental hygienist for teeth cleaning, right? And that is a form of like getting help with something that technically you could do yourself, but it's totally normalized to, you know, it would be weird if someone's like, oh no, I do my own like polishing and scaling. Like that'd be like, what? And then there's other things where it's like, no, we're supposed to do it all ourselves. And why with this thing we are, but with other things, it's totally fine for us to go and pay someone to do this for us or help us with this thing. Like, what's the line that we draw for ourselves? It's strange.
Yeah. Well, I think it was really important what you said about, you know, asking for help to make time for art. And I think that's really important, especially for parents.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a sense, like, you know, the number of people, you know, I'm sure we've all heard of who, as soon as they have kids, they stop, you know, playing their guitar, they stop painting, or they stop whatever it was they were doing for their creative expression, and they just stop doing it. And then years later, they regret it. But it's like, you don't have to give that up. You know, let's normalize for the people who can. Obviously, not everybody's going to be able to do this, but for the people who can, you know, maybe get a few hours of help throughout the week, whether it's hired help or they get recruit a parent to babysit the grandkids kind of thing, like something so that you can prioritize that time for yourself to do something creative or something meaningful, because that also demonstrates to your kids the value of taking care of yourself and the value of art. Yes. And, you know, that's the thing that I think is really important. You know, if you're thinking about what you want for your kids, you have to demonstrate that, because they're going to be picking up on all the things you're doing. You know, you can tell them art's important, take care of yourself. But if they're not seeing you do that, if they see you constantly sacrificing the things that are important to you for one reason or another, that's what they're going to remember, and that's what they're going to copy. It's such a great point. And I'm thinking, like, and also just, you know, you don't need to do art away from your kids either necessarily. Oh yeah, 100%. Like you can make it part, like you can engage them with it as well if that's what you need to do in order to fit that into your life. But yeah, also just like the power, like I'm thinking back to my childhood, and my mom and dad both always had hobbies, and I saw them engaged in them. Like for my mom, it was sewing and gardening, and later on it was motorcycling. And sometimes she included me in that hobby, and other times she didn't. And with my dad, it was like the woodworking. Like he built a kayak behind the TV. So I have memories as a kid watching The Simpsons while my dad was behind the TV with this kayak this cedar strip kayak that he was making and building as we were like, so like I had, you know, like that was when I was 6-7 years old. And I always had this awareness that adults do things outside of just caring for me. Yeah. And my parents both encouraged me to develop hobbies and to engage in those hobbies. I don't know what my life would look like if I didn't see them doing those things. I don't know, would I even have hobbies if I didn't see them actively engaged and pursuing theirs? And so it is, in a way, like I think for any parents who are maybe feeling a little bit selfish about taking that time either away from their kids or, you know, like whatever, to pursue a hobby, whether it's creative or not, just consider how that might actually be contributing to your child's life in a way you're not going to see for a little while, but in a big way. So yeah. And again, like I think as we need to be well-rounded individuals. Yeah. 100%. That even, and when you're a parent, you still need to be a well-rounded
individual, it becomes more complicated and harder because there's way more demands on your time.
Yeah.
But that it is, I think, still important to prioritize that in whatever way you can. And I'm treading very carefully here because I fully acknowledge that I am not a parent and I do not know the realities of this at all. And like totally, I'm like I'm in your corner, parents.
Yeah.
I just want what's best for you.
But you and I also have like a fair amount of experience with kids.
Yeah.
Working with kids. So we sort of, can see what happens when, certainly for me, like I get kids who are being put into music lessons and, you can kind of tell which parents value art and which ones don't.
Yeah.
Because you see it reflected in the kids and you see it with the parents who are actively engaged and who, help them with their practicing and who are interested in knowing. I have some parents, I send them update emails so they know exactly what their kids are working on. And those kids always do way better than the ones who are constantly just making, their parents just make justifications why they didn't practice. Like, oh, little Billy was too busy this week. And it's like, and then they never last. Whereas the ones, I have one student I've had for almost 7 years and is just excelling. And part of that is just because his dad is so engaged in his musical life and it makes such a difference. And it's something then that they both celebrate together as he's getting better. And it's great to be able to share an email with his dad to be like, he's doing so well and I'm so proud of him. Like that is really meaningful. And I just knowing his dad, fairly well, because I had a couple of his other kids too, is just somebody who really values all of that stuff. And that is, I know the difference it makes.
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily need to be a creative hobby either, right? And I just think, I think it's great to, as a parent, to encourage that kind of exploration. And my dad did a really good job of that with me. Like there is all sorts of things I got curious about and like different hobbies and stuff like that. And my dad would help me engage in those hobbies. And then I'd lose interest as kids do. But it was so nice to kind of have that, to just be free to try these different things out and to explore and to have my parents support that without any kind of expectation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My parents were like that too.
Yeah. And I think with the arts, it becomes a little bit challenging because I think sometimes parents start to develop an expectation that, like, especially with art specifically, it can be tricky. And what I would see parents wanting their kids to create something that quote unquote looked good, or I witnessed other adults who would like, you have this little kid trying to paint a tree and it's like kind of all over the place as it is when you're like 4 years old and painting a tree. It doesn't look like a tree. And like other adults sort of stepping in and be like, oh no, that's not how you do it. Like this is what a tree looks like. And it's like, no, like this isn't the point. Let them like freely
let them engage with the process.
Yeah, like they're just using their imagination. Like I love some of the art that I did as like a 4-year-old because it's like I can kind of tell I was trying to go for a house, but it does not look like a house, obviously. But it doesn't matter. It does. That's not. It's, at that point in time, it's not about making it look like anything. It's all about the process and the tactile, and the fine motor skills and all of that stuff that you're engaging when you're painting.
Yeah, and that's why I found like my best students aren't necessarily the ones who sound the best.
Right.
They're the ones who keep working at it, and inevitably over time they get better. But it is definitely more about just acknowledging the value of just being engaged with doing something creative and exploring something without fear, without judgment, without expectations.
That's also really incredible that they're sticking with it because I remember as a kid being very aware of like I had friends who were way better at playing piano than me, or like friends who were way better at drawing than I was. And so I think for when you see that and you still stick with the thing, like that's a huge strength in that kid, right? Because I'm sure they know like they're not, compared to other people, probably not the best player, but the fact they're still putting the work in and showing up and improving in their own time, like that is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, and that's always what I lead with my teaching. Yeah, is what matters is just doing the work. Yeah. Like the improvement will come, but everybody develops at their own pace. But if you just trust the process and take pride in having that self-discipline to stick with something even when it's not going well.
Yeah.
You know, you're developing all these character skills, and then eventually stuff starts to click, and it inevitably happens when I have somebody who sticks with lessons long enough. There hits a moment where it clicks.
Yeah.
And then they're off and running. But they've built up all this skill leading up to that. That is, like you're saying, like it's incredibly valuable, and it's such strength of character to be able to do something when you're really struggling. Like, you know, and I don't know. I remember in, it was maybe like 6th grade, we were learning how to fold paper cranes and being so frustrated because it didn't come to me naturally. Like I was sort of used to at that point, because it's just elementary school. I was pretty good at things. This is like one of the first things I had to do besides like French, which I was always just terrible at. This is like one of the first things I had to do, and it was like art related, which is what I was really interested in before. And I really struggled. And I remember my teacher making a comment, like, "I've never seen you so frustrated before." But it's because it wasn't coming to me. So, you know, I do sometimes wonder if I have had the patience to stick with music if I didn't take to it as quickly as I did. I mean, I hope so, because I mean, my love for it ran so deep. But I do think about that, you know, and I feel for the people who really struggle in the beginning. Because it is frustrating, but I think, again, the reframe really helps.
Yeah.
When there's that emphasis on the activity and not the outcome, it makes it a lot easier to be able to have that delayed gratification of like being able to do the thing you're trying to do.
The line, trust the process, that's another one that I think about a lot too. That's also very comforting when you tell someone like, just trust the process. Like immediately it's like, okay, I'm going to like, I'll put my trust in this person. I'm putting my trust in this process. I will get to where I want to go. It just might take a while like that. I don't know if it would be comforting to a child, because I can't remember what it's like to think like a kid, but I know for me, I find that concept really very comforting.
Yeah.
But it's also, and I mean, this might be a topic for another episode, but like just the importance of introducing children to art and like the benefits of putting them into things like music lessons, like what you're saying, like the skills that they're going to learn in terms of like perseverance and sticking with it and doing a hard thing and all of that stuff, you know, like trying, showing up, even though you're not excelling. Those are skills that will continue to serve them in every single thing that they do. And like
Absolutely.
That include like university, jobs, like everything. So I think sometimes we can think of extracurriculars as kind of, particularly in the arts, for people who aren't particularly passionate about the arts, I think it can be seen as kind of frivolous.
Yeah.
Like where is this going to lead? But there are some core life skills that you're learning through that process that are really, really important to the development of a child, and a 100%. Child's confidence and competence.
Yeah. And I can see where not having those experiences early on really stunted me.
Yeah.
I've had to pick up a lot of those skills later in life because I just didn't develop them from not being engaged in stuff that would have challenged me earlier on.
Yeah.
There's this really fascinating study that Adam Grant shared in his book, Hidden Potential. And it was looking at the success of people. It was one of those, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of those studies that sort of goes over the span of, you know, many years, like a couple of decades, that kind of thing. But it was trying to measure the impact, you know, different variables had on like somebody's success later on. And there's this one study that talked about how important or how much of a difference it made to have like a particular kindergarten teacher. And it had to do with like all of the character skills that teacher was able to instill in their students.
Yeah.
And like, it's the kind of thing you wouldn't think about. You tend to think school, like in terms of like your math grade and your reading and writing, which is like, of course, all important stuff, but all those like quote unquote soft skills get ignored. But that is the stuff that allows people to be resilient enough to succeed in life, to challenge themselves by pursuing an art, pursuing a hobby, doing something that they don't have to do, but that they're making the choice to do, even though it's hard, even though it takes time away from, you know, the stuff that we're supposed to care about, like work and all of that.
Those early years in education are critical. And I'm glad that they're getting, like, I'm talking early years, like, kindergarten or even preschool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's starting to get more attention now, which is great. Because like my earliest memories are of kindergarten, because I wasn't in preschool. And my earliest memories are of feeling not good enough and feeling stupid. And it was because I was doing, like, I remember when I was practicing writing my name and I wrote a letter backwards, and the way that the teacher kind of, I interpreted them as being like coming down really hard on me for not, like, it felt like they were frustrated with me because I wrote the B backwards, because maybe in their mind I should know better by now.
Yeah.
So I felt really dumb. And then I remember making this little like paper bag puppet, and I was putting the eyes in the wrong place, and I was looking around and realized, oh, everyone else is putting theirs somewhere different. And I felt really slow, like I was not able to do what everyone else was able to do. And which is really funny, because those feelings of inadequacy have stuck with me and continue to play a role. And in some cases it was internal, which is really, I don't know, where I kind of, or why I developed this kind of awareness so young of what other people were doing, and like this, and I compared what I was doing to what other people were doing to see if I was doing the right thing. I mean, it's really tragic that I was doing that at 4 years old.
Yeah.
But some of it was the way teachers were responding to what I was doing as well. Mm-hmm. And I think we kind of forget, because we see these little like 4-year-olds, and we kind of forget that they have their own, that the experiences that they're experiencing right now will continue to play a role in their life. Like, it's so easy to just dismiss kids as like, oh, they'll forget about that.
Yeah.
But maybe we do, like, maybe like we forget about the specifics, but there's an emotional scarring there that happens that can linger.
Yeah. We're like the emotional equivalent of elephants. We just never forget.
Yeah. I went off on a tangent there, but that's a topic that's always really...
Why do you think it's so important for us to develop self-compassion?
Yeah.
It's because we got so messed up as 4 and 5-year-olds that now we have to like learn how to love ourselves. Like as if it's not just a given.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think maybe the last thing I could add is just what having self-compassion has done for my music. Because I think sort of hand in hand with perfectionism was like not wanting to take chances. And if I did and I failed, I beat myself up. But now I'm like, I'm so ready to go and try things and like be okay to fall flat in my face, because I'm like, I don't beat myself up when I do that. Like, that's actually a good thing. It's like,
you'll catch yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I'll be in my own corner to say, all right, you just,
all good,
kid, get up, you try it again.
Like, that was fun.
Yeah.
Didn't work, but that was fun.
Yeah, exactly. Like, let's go again.
Try again.
Exactly. And I think that's again, it's one of these things you don't think of. You think, like, for me, I think in terms of, for a lot of years I focused on just the practicing, like all the things that were like musical, the studying and learning and listening, and all this stuff is obviously critical to being a musician, but all these additional skills that I wasn't developing as a person really held me back. And now that I'm taking the time to develop them, I'm seeing what it's doing for my music, and I'm glad to finally be at a point where I'm focusing on that and I'm making that a priority.
Yeah. Yeah, and for people who are beginning out in any kind of creative venture, that self-compassion is important, because it is going to be, you're going to have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off, because like, and there's still things that I'm doing that don't turn out, like that painting that I was trying to do. And I completely restarted. If I didn't have self-compassion, like that whole experience could have stopped me in my tracks. Right. But it helps you keep, it's essential. It helps you keep going. And that's super important in the early stages, but also even when you are more experienced, like we are, it still plays a really important role.
Yeah, it's a great skill to build early on, because it'll carry you throughout your life as an artist, for sure.
So the week ahead. So I'm curious, what goals do you have? Because I know that RPM begins on, what is it, Thursday?
Thursday, yeah. Thursday is February 1st, aka RPM Day. or the first day of RPM day. Although we get a longer month. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm pretty sure it's a leap year.
Oh, is it?
So we actually get 29 days.
Ooh. What a luxury for you.
You
An extra 24 hours.
That makes all the difference. Like, I was up until 5 a.m. last year getting mine finished. To have had the gift of an extra day probably would have saved. Actually, no, who am I kidding? I would have stayed up all night anyways.
Yeah.
Too much. The perfectionism isn't completely gone. It's still there. I'm still desperate to try to make it sound as good as possible. But no, the extra day is going to be great. Yeah. So here's the schedule I have, or the routine I have built for myself through RPM. So my morning is going to be sort of the same. I'm going to get up at 5. I'm going to read from 6 to 7. I'm going to do my music listening and my meditation. That happens between 7 and 8. And at 8 o'clock, I'm going to do 15 to 20 minutes of vocal practice. And I decided to do 15 to 20 minutes of guitar practice. So I'd actually said in the episode where we talked about month-long challenges that I didn't think I was going to practice guitar at all this month. I changed my mind. I was thinking, I think I had a little bit too much of that all or nothing mentality I get that kind of creeps in, where if I'm not like doing an hour and a half
right,
that I usually do, then it's not worth it. So I thought, no, that's stupid. Like, just do 15 to 20 minutes. One of the things I wanted to work on this year guitar wise is my improvising. And that really goes hand in hand with getting better about knowing the fretboard, which I've spent a lot of time really internalizing the fretboard, but as always, I know there's more to do. A couple of years ago, I got really into this 2-point interval system for visualizing the fretboard, which for anybody who's not a guitar player, visualizing the fretboard is like it can be sometimes a bit of a contentious topic because there's sort of different schools of thought about how to approach it. You have, the 3-note per string system, you have the cage system, and there's sort of different arguments for why one over the other is kind of better, or why you should use them both. I personally, I play both 3-note per string shapes and cage shapes, but for visualizing, I learned this 2-point system from this incredible guitarist named Tom Quayle. He has a podcast that I love called The Guitar Hour, and he's also all over YouTube and stuff. He's incredible, and this is what he uses, and it's just using these little shapes. The idea is that it's easier to manipulate these little tiny interval shapes than it is to learn these big scale shapes or arpeggio shapes or whatever. And I just completely dug into that. So he and one of his co-hosts, David Beebe, they just released a course. Like, that's a heavy duty. I have a couple of courses from each of them already that kind of got me started, but they did this like ultimate fretboard visualization course. And it sort of goes hand in hand with this app they built that lets you like work through these, which I am not a fan of using apps when I practice. I don't want my phone anywhere near me while I'm trying to do any kind of deep work. This is the one exception I'll make. So I ended up getting the app, and I'm going to do that each day for
cool.
About 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit in the app just to do my fretboard visualization. And then I'm probably going to do like a little light improvising or maybe some stretching or something, like some just shapes just to get my fingers warmed up. So that'll also keep me moving forward on that goal for the year and get me warmed up. So I feel like I'm always connected to the guitar. And then after that, it's RPM time. So I'm going to give myself 2 RPM blocks per day. That'll go from about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I'm aiming for about 3 to 4 hours of RPM time each day, and it'll be separated. So I'll go from whenever I finish my vocal and guitar warm up, I'm going to do 1.5, 2 hours. Then I'll have breakfast, and then I'll do another 1.5 to 2 hours. And then for the rest of the day, I have I go and I do my workout and I shower and I have lunch. Then I get ready to teach. And then I have whatever lessons I have in the evening. And then I have like dinner and shutdown and all that. So that's what I'm going to try. And my strategy this year, because last year I was following along with all of those videos. So I knew exactly what I was going to do for each song. And I dedicated one, like all of my practice or my RPM blocks. I did 3 last year just because I had more time. Each block was used for like a specific song. So like day 1, it was like the first block was like song 1. And then the next block was like song 2 and then song 3. This year, because I'm not following that kind of specific formula, my main goal in the beginning is just to generate ideas. And my goal is to generate like 8 ideas. So that'll be my priority for the first like 2 to 3 days. It's just like generating ideas. Then I'm going to pick the 4 I like the best, and I'm going to turn those into songs.
Okay, cool. Very cool.
So that's really my goal for the week. So aside from like the last little bit of wrapping up I have to do, so I have that one mixing course I have to finish. I'm going to finish sometime over the course of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Beyond that, then it's just like going to be RPM. So that'll be my main focus. Pretty much that's going to be it for all of February, is just getting that done. The specifics will change obviously each week. So each week I'll update. I'm trying to think too of some ways I can update. I might include some kind of an update on our Discord. Like I created a channel on our server for RPM. I'm just going to add updates. I want to see if I can like screen record, because I'd love to be able to share what I'm coming up with.
That'd be cool.
So I'm going to look into doing that. And I'd probably post it on my YouTube channel too. And then I'll just include a link in the Discord and maybe add some thoughts and stuff.
Yeah, that would be cool. I'd be interested in seeing that for sure.
And what about you? What's your plan for the week?
So in previous episodes, I'm sure I've expressed my dislike of Instagram and my determination to go off of Instagram and somehow promote myself through newsletters. Mm-hmm. I'm walking back on that statement now, and I'm actually thinking of trying to spend some time coming up with like a plan to better use Instagram. And I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. I just that's tricky because I haven't been active on there. I haven't been actively sending out newsletters or anything either. And I would like to start promoting myself more, but I have such a hard time trying to figure out like what do I share and how do I do it in a way that doesn't feel like work. And the whole reason I'm on this is because I watched or I listened to a podcast episode. I listened to Art Juice. Mm-hmm. It's a podcast by Alice Sheridan and Louise Fletcher, and it's really, really great podcast. I definitely encourage anyone who, particularly people who are visual artists, to check it out if they haven't already. I mean, it's hugely popular. But they had a guest on who was talking about, what were they talking about? I can't even remember specifically now. Oh, it was someone who was promoting a book, and I don't know if they're actually an artist or not. But they're like basically how to sell more kind of thing, and they were touching on, you know, using Instagram in a way that like it doesn't have to feel hard. It doesn't have to feel like work. It doesn't have to feel like a drag, but like just finding a way, like you can find a way to use it that feels good to you. And so I'm going to maybe give that some thought and see like what could I share on there where it does feel very like low effort, easy lift. Mm-hmm. But where I get stumped is like I get really stumped by like, what do people find interesting? Like, you know, and what she was saying, which she's like, because I think she was saying she's not an artist. So she's like, anything that like just seeing the work in progress, just seeing like that is fascinating to people who don't engage in art. Right. But I'm blind to those things because it's just like, that's just part of the process for me. Like I'm blind to the things that it would be fascinating to people who don't have art as part of their life, because I have art as part of my life. I don't have that. Yeah. I haven't experienced the opposite of that. So I'm like, I don't know what would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's definitely where I'm at with Instagram too, is like, I want to find a way to use it that is minimal effort, but still adds value. Like I'm always concerned about just clogging up, you know, the Instagram pipeline. I feel like it's already so cluttered. Yeah, so I'm curious to see what you come up with, because so far, like we started our stream of art Instagram, and I have not posted on there at all. Like I know I can see you post some stuff there, so I feel like you have, if you sort of embrace it, I think you have a knack for that kind of thing, like sharing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I need to get better at, because I think with my own art Instagram, I'm just so aware that it's a vehicle for potential commissions or potential sales, and so like that kind of like selling myself element kind of kicks in, and then I get overly concerned with like, does this fit within the rest of the look of my Instagram page, and like as I scroll into my Instagram page, I'm like, nothing, it doesn't look like it has any kind of like visual flow anyways. Like what am I concerning myself with? But I do think I need to let go of like just be honest, just share where you're at. Like you don't need to I guess what I'm concerned about is like creating a brand voice. I need to tell the brand story. I'm like, well, you're not a brand.
Yeah.
Stop taking yourself so seriously. You're just a person.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
I've taken too many.
20.
I've done too many marketing like courses and like.
Oh yeah.
And my brain has been poisoned by that kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 2024 is the year of the human being. Like, just be a person. And I mean, I've heard this talked about on podcasts before, the idea of, being authentic, but sort of having, again, boundaries, bring it back to boundaries.
Yeah.
Having enough boundaries that you're not like oversharing. So I think when it comes to like sharing your process, I think like that's definitely something I love. I love seeing musicians working on music, or seeing behind the scenes stuff. I love that stuff. I love to see the process. I love to look under the hood and like get an idea of how somebody works. And this is like beyond music too. I love behind the scenes for anything, like just to kind of know how something comes together. So something like that, like just not always showing the finished perfect product, end product, but showing like how you have to, the messy middle that,
that is the hard part. I'm realizing now, like that's the really challenging part for me, is like not showing the finished product, like showing something that's half done. Cause I'm like, this looks terrible right now. And like, I don't want to share it. Like I might have something to say about it right now. Cause like with the painting I'm working on right now, for instance, like there's lots that I can say about where it's at right now. But I don't want to put it out there because it's like, it's not done. It's not done. Like
don't look at it.
Yeah. Like I'm scared of people being like, oh, that's terrible. And it's like, no, read the caption. It's not done yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you put some sort of a watermark over it that's like work in progress? And then you have all of your posts that are like that, where you have a picture of a work in progress that says like work in progress just in the corner, just so that people know that that's what it is. And then maybe it also sparks some curiosity, like, oh, this is something. Yeah. And then it might even like incentivize people to like want to come back and check later to see like, if you say, I'm going to post the finished product once it's done kind of thing, then it's like you're bringing people more like along with you for that journey of how a painting comes to be.
Yeah. Interesting idea. Anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at for next week. It's just kind of giving some thought as to, do I engage in Instagram again and kind of revitalize that, or do I not? And if I do, like, what's my plan? Like, what can I share? Which I think is part of the reason why I thought it'd be interesting to continue that painting a day thing. Cause then at least it gives me something, like it gives me something to kind of share. Like, here are some things I worked on this week. Because I'm not always working on a large painting. I'm not always working on something bigger. Yeah. Anyways, I'm just thinking like I need to stop taking myself so seriously, because ultimately, like I'm not.
Same here.
I don't need to worry about like creating some sort of story, or it just doesn't matter if things are all over the place.
Sometimes that's what stories are like.
Yeah,
they're not clear cut. We can't try to force everything we're doing into some clear linear narrative. Like it just doesn't always work that way, and
it doesn't actually necessarily add value too. And going back to what you're saying, and I think this is where I struggle as well, because like sometimes it's like I feel like when I share, it feels I think the thing I don't like about Instagram is it feels like such a one-sided conversation too.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just add noise, like I do want to add something that like intrigues people or brings people comfort in some way. And I haven't quite figured out what that would look like yet.
Yeah. Guess you got to bring in that, experimentation mindset and just try a bunch of things until you find something that fits. I feel like I've heard that from people who do end up being pretty successful with their Instagram accounts, is that they just tried a bunch of things and then eventually something clicks that just feels like it resonates with people.
Yeah. And writing the captions I find really tedious too, because it takes me so long to like properly phrase things that it's like it would be easier for me to just talk.
Could you not just like do a voice record,
I might be able to,
and then transcribe that?
Oh yeah, but I'm actually wondering.
You can do the voice. Yeah,
I wonder if I can actually do a voice. Anyways, I'll play.
That might be more engaging, actually, having that over top of over top of the and that's just like some things to try. and see what you like and what creates the least amount of friction for you to produce, and then what resonates the most.
Okay, I have some ideas. Woo! Cool. Good combo.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our podcast once again. You can send questions and comments to streamofartpodcast@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Instagram @streamofartpodcast. And feel free to join our Discord. It got quite active this week. Still just the three of us. Just me, Robyn, and best
Michelle.
friend Josh. And yeah, Robyn's trying to instigate some kind of a big making fun of Michelle fest.
I'm mischievous.
Which it's one way of putting it. You and my cat, it feels like you're in cahoots.
Yeah.
Just trying to make my life difficult.
I just want to see the anger, the angry outburst, Michelle. That's all.
I see. You're just trying to incite me to anger. But but I've done too much work. You can't get to me.
I missed my window of opportunity.
Yeah.
Shoot.
That window closed for the most part a couple of years ago. You just have to hit me when I'm tired and or hungry.
Okay.
And then the window opens again briefly. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun for most people except me when I'm getting ganged up on. But it's okay. It's okay if you want to join the stockpile, or come to my defense. Please join the Discord. I have the link as always in the show notes. And for anybody who doesn't think to check the show notes, I also like to include full quotes. So anytime Robyn or I reference some kind of a quote, I always put the full quote in the show notes just for anybody who's curious, and always because I rarely remember the full quote. So I like to just make sure we have the full quote there. I like to share links too. So if I ever write a blog post that is related to the topic at hand, I'll add a link. I'll add links to the books we talk about. So I'll add a link to both of the podcasts that we mentioned. Mm-hmm. So there are useful links there. So feel free to go and have a scroll and click on anything you find interesting. There's more information about us too. There's links to both of our websites. So, feel free to check that out. And I think that's it. So we will see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.